Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast all about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is August 24th, 2018. Greetings from Ocean Park, Maine, where I rode the magic Skype carpet all the way to Seattle this week for a conversation with the editorial director of Thomas & Mercer. That's the Amazon publishing imprint responsible for changing the life of Robert Dugoni, author of the Tracy Crosswhite mystery series, who was my guest on last week's show. This week's guest is Grace Doyle, who is the editorial director at Thomas & Mercer.
I remember the first time I met Bob over lunch, and I was just so impressed as we were talking about how well he already knew Tracy. I mean, he knew her backstory, he knew her life. He had a lot of ideas for her about where she was going to go in the future. And he was really eager to collaborate with us.
Also this week, some great deals on Amazon devices, even though it's not Prime Day or Black Friday. My visit to a Walmart here in Maine to look for evidence of the retailer's new partnership with Kobo, and a handy website that will tell you how long it is going to take to read your next book. First up in news are some pretty good deals that Amazon has on some of its devices, and it's no special time. There is one banner which calls these off to college deals, but whatever you call them, there's some really good prices. The one that's the most impressive to me is the Echo Show is now selling for $130, and that's $100 off the usual price of $230. As you know, I am a big fan of this device, especially if you need to keep in touch with someone at a distance and have drop-dead easy video conferencing that you can set up through the drop-in feature. There is also a sale on the Echo Dot. That's the hockey puck size Echo second generation. It's selling for $40. That's $10 off. The Fire TV box, which you plug into your TV, is selling for $30 off, and it's now priced at $40. The Fire TV Cube, which gives you a combination of Alexa and Fire TV, is selling for $90. That's a $30 discount. And the Echo Plus, that's the...
Sorry, I'm not sure.
That's my HD10, which I need to turn off the Alexa hands-free. There we go. The Echo Plus, that's the tall Echo. The canister looks like a tennis ball contraption, and the Plus has extra features which are useful in setting up smart home devices. It's selling for $100, and that's $65 off. I'll have links to these in the show notes, and they'll have my Amazon Associates code in them, so if you take advantage of any of these deals by starting on those links, you'll be helping out the show with some commissions. Next in news, I read with considerable interest this week about Kobo's partnership with Walmart. This was announced earlier this year, I think in January, and it's in effect online, but I stopped by the Biddeford, Maine Walmart store, which is right near here at Ocean Park this morning, to see if there was any evidence of this partnership in the store. There wasn't. I got directed to the electronics department, and someone was having a long conversation with the sole tech guy there about how to buy a printer, and I listened for a while and then wandered off. I finally interrupted the guy to see if I could get some help.
Documents, printing, scanning, like business type of thing.
Can I get a quick question? Do you have the Kobo eReaders, do you know?
No idea.
No idea.
If you want to wait a minute, I can probably look that up on my phone and see if I can find it in the store.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
I had to get back to the cottage to meet a guy who was going to help us trim some trees in the grove around the cottages, so I didn't have time to wait for the conversation about the printer to finish. But as I walked out the store, I happened on a guy who said on his name tag, store manager. I don't know if he was the store manager. He had the same answer, but he gave it in a more authoritative way. And there was another guy next to him that seemed to have some vague sense that something was happening with the Kobo e-readers.
Yeah, no, Walmart's going to have them, but I guess it's just not in yet.
I haven't seen them, but we haven't done a reset in electronics yet.
Oh, okay. You can order them online and get them.
You might be able, yeah.
But you don't
you
have
can get them online,
store.
but not in the store yet.
Okay. You think you're going to have them in the store? Or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
If it's online, maybe.
Right.
I mean, it's all 2-day shipping.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's free.
Yeah.
I mean, we could get them in when they do reset the the department.
Go ahead, Amy.
Oh, I see.
But
Yeah, because you're going to sell ebooks and everything.
Yep.
It's going to be
Yeah.
a
Oh,
big
yeah.
partnership.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Watch that one.
Okay, thanks.
The store manager pulled out his smartphone and he found the fact that the Kobos were listed, and as he said, were available to be shipped to the store for 2-day shipping free, and that would be handy, but no sign of them in the stores yet. I've owned a Kobo in the past. It's a nice device. They had an e-ink reader, and for a while they were hooked up with independent bookstores through the American Booksellers Association, and I bought a Kobo book at the Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge because the deal was they were going to get some benefit of it. I remember talking to someone at the ABA at the time on background, and he was saying the reason this probably wasn't going to work is because that you couldn't buy Kobos at what he called the big box stores. This was probably 5 years ago or so. And so now you can, and it's obviously a good opportunity for Kobo to try to make a dent in the U.S. market. At this point, Kindle is probably 75% of the ebook market in the U.S., and Kobo is, I think, under 1%. It's a tiny fraction. And the question is, will they really make much of a dent in Amazon's share? Certainly anybody who has 1,000 ebooks in the Kindle format is not going to be tempted to switch to buying books on Kobo. There might be a reason to have one of each, although I can't really determine what that reason might be. If someone has waited to try ebooks and they're at a Walmart and they see a good price on a Kobo, or they see some of the advertising that's going to happen, it might be an opportunity for some people who just hadn't used an e-reader yet to go the Kobo route as opposed to the Kindle route. I did try to connect my Walmart account with my Kobo account because I knew I would be able to download Kobo books to the Kobo app, and there's now a Walmart eBooks app which you can download from iTunes and I'm sure Android. But I found that the process of getting these two accounts synchronized it took at least a half an hour, maybe more, last night of fooling around to get it. I did finally get it to work, and there's a $10 discount available to promote this partnership. For some reason, I didn't get the full $10 when I bought The Things They Carried, which is a great book about Vietnam by Tim O'Brien that I've been meaning to buy. I got about a $7 or $8 discount on the $10 price for that, which was good. And now I can read it on the app on my iPhone. One thing I noticed in reading that Kobo app on my iPhone is that there's kind of a funky way that the page changes. It seemed like half of the page would be blank and then the type would change. It was a distracting glitch in that app, which they'll probably fix as time goes on. I will probably break down and buy another Kobo because I think this would be a good time to do a careful comparison of reading on a Kindle versus reading on a Kobo. Kobo's got quite a presence around the world. It was bought by Rakuten, the Japanese company, a number of years ago, and Michael Tamblyn, the original guy at Kobo from Canada, is still in charge. He's a charismatic, great salesman, and there's some ads that he has promoting this, and with some justification. But I am sure that I'm going to find out that if you compare reading on a Kindle with X-ray and translation and all the other aspects of the Kindle platform that have been quietly added over the past 10 years, that it's going to be a better experience buying books than the Kobo. But who knows? Maybe I'll be surprised. I think one thing I do know is that the Kobo has a better integration with Overdrive, which is also owned by Rakuten, so that it's a little easier to get a book from your public library onto a Kobo than it is on your Kindle. Just slightly. I think it's one or two clicks. It's not a dramatically different interface, but the Overdrive app is a little handier on the Kobo. Another item in news that I found interesting was a report from Bloomberg about a week ago saying that Amazon is in the running to acquire Landmark Theaters. That's a theater chain of art house indie movies. They have quite a presence in Denver, and Darlene and I have gone to the Mayan Theater on Broadway in Denver. There's some others. There's also one in Cambridge. I think the Kendall Square Theater is part of that chain. They have more than 50 theaters in 27 markets, including high-profile locations in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. I find this appealing. Anytime Amazon does something like acquire Whole Foods or other ventures, if you are a Prime member, as I am, you can bet that there are going to be some advantages of it. There might be a movie night that gives 50% off to Prime members or who knows what. And it obviously has some kind of a possible synchronization with Prime Video, and Amazon has made some original movies. So this does seem like a logical step for them to take. Just kind of a report or a rumor at this phase, and don't know if it's actually going to happen. I'll also have a link in the show notes to an article from Slate that was forwarded to me by listener Dan Campbell. It's titled, "Alexa is Losing Her Edge." It's by Will Oremus. It confirms something that I've known and listening to Bradley Metrock's podcast and other sources. Google is coming up fast in this voice technology, and I must say that the Google Home Assistant that I have on my desk here is quite an attractive device, and the information that I get from it is usually equal to what I get from the show, and in some ways it throws in some nifty sound effects, and it's obviously a very well done device. And sometimes I just think, well, I have a question here which I bet is too complicated or tricky for Alexa to answer. I'm going to try it on and say, "Hey Google," and see what comes up. But anyway, this has got numbers telling the story. Obviously, Google and Amazon are not announcing how many of these devices they've sold, but piecing it together, this article shows a significant decline in the market share for the Alexa devices and an increase for the Google devices, and also a little bit more success from Apple's device at the same time. I like the ending of the story. It's he doesn't seem to have a preference for one of these, but he says that Amazon no longer looks poised to monopolize smart speakers might reassure critics wary of its online retail dominance, but the prospect of Google's dominance should give privacy advocates pause. What we have now, thankfully, is a hotly competitive industry, the kind that is unlikely to give rise to any proprietary eponyms. Computer, what does eponym mean?
Eponym is usually defined as the person for whom something is named or, alternatively, the name derived from a person, real or imaginary.
Hey Google, what does eponym mean?
Here's the definition of eponym. A person after whom a discovery, invention, place, etc. is named or thought to be named.
Well, two different definitions of the same word, and I'd rate that a tie. Okay, so that's the reference there is that none of these devices is going to get to be the Kleenex of this category. In other words, a brand that's so dominant that it simply becomes the name for smart speakers. And I'm fine with that. I like the idea that there's competition in this important area of the evolution of the interface between us and computers, and I'm sure Alexa's going to hold her own, and it's going to be fascinating to follow the development in this area in the coming years. The last story that I'll link to is from Forbes. Can blockchain disrupt the ebook market? 2 startups will find out. We'll hear more about this next week because I was able to track down one of the startups that is mentioned here, Publica, and it's based in Gibraltar and Latvia, and I'm going to have the CEO of the company on the show next week, Joseph Mark. What they're doing is using blockchain technology to make books available. You get a token to get a book. It's all fascinating, and I'm going to try to download the one book that Publica has available through its technology between now and next week when I talk to the CEO. I'll be using an Ether on the Ethereum blockchain that I've been experimenting with before. As you can imagine, the chance to be talking about an ebook distribution through blockchain has got my attention pretty high. The other thing I'll mention is that with some birthday help from my parents, I've registered for a 6-week intensive blockchain course at the Sloan Management School at MIT, and one of the faculty members is a woman that I heard at South by Southwest. She was brilliant, and the faculty looks like it's very high quality. I'm afraid I'm going to be a little in over my head on this, and be very curious to see what types of people from around the world are going to participate. But it starts the day before my birthday on August 29th, and in 6 weeks I'll be spending at least an hour a day on this course. I should know more about this topic than I know now, and I'm really excited about it. For the tech tip, I want to pass along a pretty cool site that I learned about at Recommendo. That's a list of 6 or 7 great ideas that arrives in my inbox each week from Kevin Kelly. This one is, the URL is www.howlongtoreadthis.com. And it's totally simple. You enter the title of a book, and then there's a little sample of the book which you can time yourself reading. It uses that information to figure out how fast you're reading. As an example, I'm reading Mark Twain, A Life by Ron Powers. It clocked my reading at 360 words per minute, and it said that it will take me 8 hours and 41 minutes to read the book. It's a long book, a great book. I'm really enjoying it. The other one I'm reading is a collection of 5 novels by Edward St. Aubin titled Patrick Melrose. There was a series, I think a Showtime series made of that, and that is going to take me 10 hours and 23 minutes to read. So if you're thinking of reading a book and you wonder how much of a time commitment it's going to take given how fast you read, go to howlongtoreadthis.com. Grace Doyle has worked at a venerable Boston publisher, Houghton Mifflin, an elite winery in the Seattle area, and for the past 6 years at Thomas & Mercer, the mystery, thriller, and true crime imprint of Amazon Publishing. Grace was publicity manager for Thomas & Mercer when Robert Dugoni's manuscript for My Sister's Grave came in for consideration. After speaking with Bob for last week's show, I thought you might like to hear from Gracie in her current role as the editorial director at Thomas & Mercer. We talked on Wednesday, August 22nd, via a pretty good Skype connection from Ocean Park, Maine to Seattle. She also backed up her side with an iPhone voice memo recorder, which was really great because actually the Skype had given us a little trouble. But that's a great way to get a backup on one of these interviews that I do. I began by asking about how she first encountered the work of Bob Dugoni.
I was actually the publicity manager for Thomas & Mercer at the time that the manuscript for My Sister's Grave came into Alan Turkis, who was our editorial director at the time. And I remember Alan sent it over for me and other members of the team to have an early read, and we just all fell in love with it. You know, Tracy Crosswhite has such a compelling backstory, and was just really appealing and had a really fresh voice. We were all fans of Bob's David Sloan series, which he had published earlier. And we really felt that together as a team, working together with Bob, we could really get in front of a whole new audience of readers with this book, because this was such a special book. So I remember the first time I met Bob over lunch, and I was just so impressed as we were talking about how well he already knew Tracy. I mean, he knew her backstory. He knew her life. He had a lot of ideas for her about where she was going to go in the future. And he was really eager to collaborate with us as well, both editorially and on the publicity side and marketing. And that collaboration has continued. You know, we just published the 6th Tracy Crosswhite book, A Steep Price, and we did the 7th Canon, which was a standalone legal thriller. And we have a great new thriller coming from him next year, as well as more Tracy books. So it's been a really great collaboration.
I was interested in the fact that Bob had 2 standalone novels in addition to the 2 series, the 7th Canon and The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell. Is he unusual as an author within Amazon Publishing to have published in 2 different imprints, the Lake Union as well as Thomas & Mercer?
Well, I wouldn't say it's something that happens every day. I mean, we always want our authors to write the books that excite them and then do the best we can to find the largest audience for those stories and those books. So in the case of the 7th Canon, which Thomas & Mercer did publish, Bob had actually written a first draft of that book back in the 90s before he wrote the David Sloan series, and it had been sitting in a drawer. And he showed it to us at a certain point, and we read it and just thought it was fantastic. You know, I'm from San Francisco originally, and this was a San Francisco set legal thriller with a lot of heart. And we worked on it, we updated it and revised it and put it out, and it's been a great success. And we do talk about sometimes doing another Peter Donnelly book in the future. So that was great. And then with Sam Hell, which is the book that Lake Union Publishing published, that's another story that Bob had been working on and off for many years. And it's really a story of his heart. I know you talked to him about it at length last week. And it's really, you know, it's got a lot of autobiographical elements, and it was something different for him. And he sent me the manuscript, and I just fell in love with it. And I knew that readers would as well. I also knew it wasn't a thriller, which is, of course, my area of specialization. And we thought, you know, our friends over at Lake Union can do a great job with this book. And so we sent it over, and Danielle Marshall, who's the editorial director there, took it on and just proved to be the perfect editor for it. And she and Bob polished it up and made it into just such a great book. And it's really been wonderful to see the reader response.
That's cool. Well, I remember when Thomas and Mercer was launched back in 2011, and there were 4 books that were announced that year. I know you've been busy since then, but can you tell me what the total number of books that Thomas and Mercer has published in the last 7 years?
Sure. We've now, so since 2011, we are over 900 books now. And that breaks down, we are doing about 100 books globally a year.
Is that a lot or a little, or what kind of a number is that in the overall world of publishing?
You know, I can't really speak to the size of anybody else's list, but we have found, you know, there's been years where we have had more, there's been years where we've had less, and this seems to be a good sweet spot for us in terms of enough books that we have a great variety to share with readers, and also are being able to spend a good amount of time with the authors working on the books and making them the best they can be.
How about the mix between established authors and debut authors?
It really varies. I mean, what we're trying to do is always have a really good, balanced publication list, and are always looking at a mix of, you know, exciting debuts, new projects from authors who we've been working with and are still building, and also new projects from authors. You know, Bob Dugoni's a great example. Authors who are established but are coming over to work with us. So, for example, when I look at our publication calendar over the next couple of months, we have a couple of really exciting debuts coming from authors like Catherine Riggs and Matthew Farrell. We have Debris Line, which is the 4th Gibson Vaughn book from Matthew Fitzsimmons. His debut was The Short Drop, which was a uber success for us a couple of years ago. And then we also have an incredible new work from Brian Grewley, who's an Edgar Award nominee and a Pulitzer Prize winner, called Bleak Harbor, that's going to be coming out in December. So that gives you an idea of the kind of mix that we have between debuts and authors who we kind of consider house authors, and then authors who are new to us.
Right. Well, I've also been interested in the role of the editor. I've talked mainly with authors, but I think I've had some editors on the show, and I probably indirectly from hearing authors talk about their experience, like Bob talking about Alan Turkus, it almost seems like it's a midwife, it's a coach, it's a cheerleader, it's sometimes kind of a judge. But in your time of editing books, how do you see that role? What kind of help do you give an author as the editor?
I view an editor's role as really helping to make good books great, and connecting, doing everything that we can to make those books perfect and get them out and connect authors with readers, and really take care of things so that the author has the time and the mind space to do what they do best, which is write the books. I mean, that's one thing we always tell authors, is the best thing they can be doing is with their time is writing. And so we want to take care of everything else. And really, again, just taking books and manuscripts that are already wonderful, which is why we acquire them, and just making them even better so that we can get them in front of the most number of readers.
How many books can an editor work on at a time?
Again, I think it varies, but I would say for me, I usually have about 3 to 4 projects at some stage in the editing process at a time, whether it's a new submission that I'm reading, or a manuscript that I've acquired that I'm editing, or a manuscript that I've edited and now is in production, and I'm helping shepherd it through production. So it's usually about 3 or 4 at a time.
Is one of your current projects the Patricia Cornwell's Quantum series, which is coming out in December of 2019?
Yes, that is something we are extremely excited about. And personally, as a longtime reader of Patricia's, I'm incredibly excited to launch this new series. You know, Captain Callie Chase is a new character for her. She's a young NASA test pilot and aerospace engineer whose twin sister is a fighter pilot and astronaut who is murdered. And so then Captain Chase is kind of trying to uncover what happened to her sister against a backdrop of NASA and space exploration and space science. So, you know, one of the things that I always have loved about Patricia Cornwell is, you know, Kay Scarpetta was such a groundbreaking character. When Postmortem came out in the early 90s, people weren't really reading about forensic science, and it was pre-CSI, it was pre all of these shows where now we all feel like we're crime scene experts. And Kay Scarpetta really made forensic science something that was familiar to readers all over the world. And it's really exciting to think about how Captain Chase might be a new trailblazer in teaching us about space science and space exploration.
I talked to her about Ripper, The Secret Life of Walter Sickert, and that book had some pretty effective uses of Kindle in Motion technology. And I think when I talked with her, the idea came out as, is that something that you could include in a novel? And she seemed open to the idea. Do you know if there's going to be any of that animation in the new book?
Well, it's still pretty early. As you said, the book isn't coming out until the end of next year. So I think we're kind of still figuring out what's going to be the best way to just make this the most exciting release for readers.
Has there been any Kindle in Motion animation in other fiction? I think there's been some. The other one I remember was the Scott Parazynski memoir had some. But it's an interesting idea to think of whether that would be disruptive in a novel or something that might be effective. Maybe you've already done it.
Well, I can tell you for Thomas and Mercer, we've had a couple of projects, books that had been out that we did new Kindle in Motion editions of. One was Barry Eisler's Graveyard of Memories, which was a John Rain thriller. And another one that we did was Good Behavior from Blake Crouch. And the reader response on the animation and the Kindle in Motion features on those was really positive.
Interesting. So people didn't think it detracted from being immersed in the story.
I don't think so. And, you know, as a reader, I actually felt, you know, spending a lot of time with both of those books that all of that is taken into consideration, and the animation and the special features were done in such a way that they purposely were trying not to be, to break in on the reading experience.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so much more effective than some of the other kind of enhanced ebook things where they would drop a video of the author talking about it just in the middle of things. But I don't know if it was Patricia's book or another one I saw where the Kindle in Motion animations were at the chapter beginnings, and so you're chapter so-and-so, and you realize that the graphic is sort of changing on you in very subtle ways. So it's really a fascinating opportunity for enhancing ebooks.
Yeah, I think they have done a great job, and I will pass on your feedback to them because they're always happy to hear from readers.
The other thing I've wondered is the difference between a mystery and a thriller.
Well, the way we generally look at it is, a mystery usually has some sort of whodunit element, and the story is really focused around trying to solve the crime and figure out what happened. Whereas in a thriller, we often already know who the bad guys or the perpetrators are, and the story is really more about either trying to prove that or trying to stop another crime from happening. And there's a lot of different subgenres within each category, but that kind of breaks down the general difference.
Now, and then there's a third category, true crime, and am I right that you're just about to enter that category, or what are you doing in the true crime area?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. You know, we did jump into true crime with Ripper last year, and that was just a wonderful experience working with Patricia Cornwell on that. And we are looking to continue to publish some true crime every year, or crime nonfiction. And so we have a great book coming up in 2019 from Greg Olson, who's a very well-regarded, award-winning true crime writer as well as a fiction novelist. It's called The Serial Killer's Daughters, and it's about the family of a female serial killer here in the Pacific Northwest. And Greg has become quite close to the family and has gotten some really exclusive interviews with them and spent a lot of time with them. So we think that's just going to be a wonderful book. And one thing that's really cool about the relationship with Greg, as I said, Greg is a very well-regarded author of both fiction and nonfiction, and has developed quite a close relationship with Liz Pearsons, who's his editor here at Thomas & Mercer. We've been publishing crime novels from him for a couple of years now, and now he's made the jump to publishing true crime with us. And so we are very excited about that. We think that's going to be a really big book, and we'll continue to publish his thrillers as well.
When this would have come up, I suppose, when Patricia, the Ripper, came along. Was there a possibility of having a separate imprint that would be just true crime as opposed to folding it in under Thomas & Mercer?
I think right now we're happy having them under Thomas & Mercer. Anything is possible, and I think it will sort of depend on how big that grows as a portion of our list. But we're comfortable. We have a sister imprint, Little A, that publishes both fiction and nonfiction, and we're excited to sort of get our feet into that as well.
You came to Amazon in July of 2012, and you worked for 6 years as a communications manager for Saint Michel Wine Estates, located outside of Seattle. I'm wondering if, when you think of doing marketing for a winery versus a book publisher, some things the same, some things different, any kind of ideas that you brought to book publishing from working in a winery that turned it out to be hadn't been thought of before and surprisingly effective?
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny. I started my career at Houghton Mifflin in Boston, so I had worked in book publishing for about 6 years before I moved west and took the job at Saint Michel. And there are actually more similarities than you might think between working with wine and working with books. A bottle of wine and a book are both the result of someone's craft and hard work, and both provide enjoyment to those who partake of them. An author, much like a winemaker, will often wait years to see, so to speak, the fruits of his labors in the hands of others. And every story is unique, just like every wine is unique. So I was pleasantly surprised to kind of see the similarities between working with books and working with wine. Of course, books more clearly transport you to a different time and place and into someone else's head. And often, reading a good book takes longer than enjoying a good glass of wine.
Right.
So it's really, for me, it's always about connecting with, whether it's an author or a winemaker, and finding the stories there and really helping to get what they're doing in front of people. And especially now, the last 3 years that I've been editorial director at Thomas & Mercer, and really deeply involved with the authors in helping to develop their stories and get them ready for publication. It's kind of a continuation of what I feel I've always been doing.
Interesting. Bob Dugoni's story about how the success he's had with Thomas & Mercer has really changed his life, and the benefits to his family, and just the excitement he has about seeing so many books read. You probably have some other stories of authors who's have left one job so they could write full time, or when you think of people whose lives you've changed as authors, who comes to mind?
Well, I can't speak for anyone directly, but certainly we do have a number of authors who have shared with us the changes in their life that have come from their success working with us. And one person I think of in particular is Matthew Fitzsimmons, who I mentioned earlier, who wrote The Short Drop, which was his debut that we published at the end of 2015. It was a phenomenal success. It was the first book in the Gibson Vaughn series. We're now just about to publish book 4, Debris Line, later this fall. And Matt was a high school English teacher in D.C. and has been able to become a full-time novelist. And that's just thrilling when that happens. I mean, that's really always our goal, is for our authors to get such a great readership and to be continuing to build their careers so that they can really spend their time writing.
Another question I wanted to ask you relates to my wife, who's really loves mysteries, and she's reading all the time. And I've made the mistake sometimes where something will come across from you guys or somewhere else, and I think, oh boy, there's a mystery. I bet Darlene will love it, and I'll suggest it to her, and she'll know instantly. Well, no, that's not the kind of mystery I read. What a silly suggestion. And if you have friends and family that you're trying to, they come to you and say, I'm out of books. Who's a good mystery writer? Do you have any kind of a protocol of questions that help you quickly find out what sort of a mystery reader the person is and how you might help connect them with somebody they'll really enjoy?
Well, it does come up a lot because, as you can imagine, I do get asked for recommendations quite often, and it is pretty subjective. I do. One thing I always like to start with is if I know somebody quite well and I know what kinds of books they like, it's one thing, but finding out what kind of stories they're interested in and characters. I think of my mother-in-law, for example, who lives here in Seattle. She loves detective novels, and she particularly likes ones that are set in the Pacific Northwest and often that have a level of humor to them. So she's a big fan of the Tracy Crosswhite series, but she also just loves the Leo Waterman books from G.M. Ford, who's another author that we publish. And those books are set in Seattle and feature a PI who's pretty sardonic and have a great humorous element. So she's someone who I know what she likes and I know what I can recommend to her. My own mother, on the other hand, is kind of all over the map in what she likes, but she particularly likes mysteries that are a little more literary and maybe historical. So, for example, she loved The Alienist by Caleb Carr, which came out several years ago, but is a classic in that arena. So we published a book several months ago called Edinburgh Twilight by Carol Lawrence, which was a debut set in turn-of-the-century Edinburgh, an early criminalist. And so I gave that to my mom, and she loved it and is eagerly awaiting the sequel, which is coming out next week, actually. So that's another example of where, once you kind of know a general sense of what someone's looking for in their subgenres and in their characters, it's a little easier.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I wondered is, since so many people that I've talked to, they tend to read mysteries to take a break. I mean, Jack Kennedy famously read Agatha Christie, and I can remember thinking, wow, that's interesting. And I suspect there's a sense of traveling to a different world and having some relaxation and renewal as you're reading a mystery. But for someone like you who's reading mysteries every day of your working life, what sort of books do you read when you need to get a break from your work?
Well, I do read a lot of mystery and thrillers for fun. One of the reasons I think I have such a wonderful job is that I've always been a fan of mysteries and thrillers. So I do still tend to read a lot of them for fun. But as you pointed out, sometimes it is nice to get a little bit of a palate cleanser and read some different kinds of books. So I do a lot of nonfiction. I just started reading a book called Hero of the Empire by Candace Millard, which is about Winston Churchill and his time fighting and then being imprisoned and escaping in the Boer War. And then I just also am reading Warlight by Michael Ondaatje, who's one of my favorite literary novelists. I try, as many readers do, I try to have a few books going at a time. So those are the two I've got going now, besides the manuscripts I'm reading that are mysteries and thrillers.
Are you reading on a Kindle or sometimes in paper or on your phone? What's the usual place that you're reading novels these days?
Well, my eyes, unfortunately, are not super good for reading on my phone, but I do a pretty good mix between, mostly I'm reading on a Kindle just because it's easier for me to take that everywhere and I love the reading experience. But I do still have books that I read in print. And particularly for me, sometimes the feeling of an author, maybe a book that I'm rereading that I've had on the shelf for a long time. I like the feeling of pulling that book down and reading again. But really, especially for when I'm traveling, which is quite a bit, or when I'm reading manuscripts, or when I'm binge reading a series, you can't beat reading on the Kindle.
I've wondered if reading on a Kindle, especially at night in bed, is scarier than reading a book on paper. Do you have any sense of that based on your experience?
Well, with the lighting on the Kindles, it is a lot easier to read a Kindle in the dark than it is to read a book. So I guess that would make for a good, scarier experience.
Yeah, we'll have to have somebody do a research project on that sometimes.
That
see
sounds
the
like a
level
good
of
exercise.
screening in the two different ways. Let's see. Well, now I think you mentioned some books that are coming out. I like just giving people lots of books to think about. Is there any books that we didn't talk about yet that you want to mention that are either coming the rest of this year or into 2019?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many books on our list that I'm really excited about. But when I think about, I gave you a little bit of an overview of the next couple months of what I'm really excited about. When I look into early 2019. There's several that I really can't wait to release. I'll give you three. One of them is The Killer Collective from Barry Eisler, which combines the worlds of his best-selling John Raines series and Livy Alone series into one big action-packed international political thriller. So that should be quite exciting for fans of both series as well as new readers. The other is Lee Goldberg's Killer Thriller, which is the follow-up to his book that came out earlier this year called True Fiction, which was the first book in the Ian Ludlow series. And these are incredibly fun, somewhat comic, somewhat satirical thrillers about a best-selling thriller writer who has to become the hero in his own life, and unwittingly becomes involved in multiple international government conspiracies. So Killer Thriller's coming out in February, and that will be really fun. And then finally, on a sort of more serious note, Christopher Rice's book Blood Echo, which is the sequel to Bone Music and continues the story of Charlotte Rowe, who's the burning girl. She's a woman who was kidnapped and raised by serial killers, escaped from them, and is now kind of a superpowered avenger of evil herself. And so that series is continuing on early next year. And all three of those, we couldn't be more excited about. Of course, there's many others on the list that I could go on and on, but I'll leave it at those three.
That's right. Those are some good. And I'll have links to those in the show notes, so if people want to follow up, they'll be easy to find. Is it true that all of the Thomas and Mercer books are available for people that subscribe to Kindle Unlimited?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also price the ebooks in a sane way, which I know all of my listeners appreciate. One of the things that was most touching in talking to Bob was that we talked about the pricing and how, the Big Five are continuing to price ebooks in kind of a crazy way. He said, yes, it's great for people to read ebooks to have them priced that way, but he's gotten letters from people who say, I'm on cancer treatments and I read 5 mysteries a week and I'm able to buy your books. I can afford them. And just that gratitude for having the books that accessible to people. And he said, sometimes he's heard people in large publishers say they don't want to devalue a book by pricing it too low. How can the book be any more valuable when it's affecting people's lives like that and is affordable?
Yeah, I think it's really, our goal has always been make all of our books available to anyone who wants to read them at any time in any format that they want to read them in. And part of that is, removing or lowering some of the barriers to getting to those books. And I think that's, Bob's point is a really good one. I think that also, when you think about finding readers all over the world, it's something that we look to do. I was fortunate enough to attend the Paris Book Fair earlier this year. Bob Dugoni was invited as a special guest there because they've been translating the Tracy Crosswhite books, and he was treated like a rock star. And it's interesting to think about readers around the world being able to find these books about a chemistry teacher turned homicide detective in Seattle, Washington. And I think that's the global power of stories, and great stories are something that appeals to everyone. And so I think, again, just figuring out the best ways so that we can make it that anyone who wants to pick up these books can is really something we're working towards.
Good job. I have been speaking with Grace Doyle, editorial director at Thomas and Mercer, the mystery, thriller, and true crime imprint of Amazon Publishing. Thanks very much, Gracie.
Thank you so much for having me on.
before we go, I'd like to clean up an error I made last week. I quoted a comment from Dan Barnett about the end of the Kindle Scout program. Also, I'll have a link in the show notes to books that were published by the crowdsourced Kindle Scout program before it was ended. But Dan sent me the information about that, but I called him by another last name, and it turns out there are 3 Dans that I communicate with: Dan Campbell, Dan Barnett, and Dan Reich. So sometimes when I'm moving quickly to cut and paste from emails into the show, I'm going to have to be careful when I see something from Dan, because there's more than one of you out there, and I apologize for the confusion. I'll try to get it straight. Next week's guest will be Joseph Marks, CEO of Publica, the startup that is publishing books using blockchain tokens. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Ocean Park, Maine. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.